Welcome to the Junior High Humanities Podcast, where our students dive deep into the heart of what it means to be fully human.
Every episode is a student-driven journey featuring their unique insights, reflections, and discoveries from their humanities assignments.
Stay tuned to the Junior High Humanities Podcast for a captivating exploration of humanity, faith, and learning.
I'm Shane, and I'm here with Miles. Today we're talking about the Supreme Court case, Cooper versus Aaron. Alright, Miles, I think we've been looking at this case long enough, but I'm still kind of shocked about how bold the decision was in Cooper versus Aaron. This case is huge, and I feel like a lot of people today don't fully understand its significance.
Yeah, it's definitely one of those cases that doesn't get enough attention compared to other civil rights milestones. But when you look at the context, it's wild. We're talking about a state directly defying the Supreme Court, right?
Exactly. For a bit of background, Cooper versus Aaron was decided in 1958. It was a direct response to Arkansas Governor Orval Faubus, an Arkansas legislator trying to block the desegregation of schools in Little Rock, despite the Brown v. Board of Education decision in 1954. You know, the ruling that declared the racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional.
Right. The thing is, by 1957, we had the infamous showdown with Little Rock 9, those 9 black students who tried to integrate Little Rock Central High. The governor, Faubus, sent in the National Guard to prevent them from entering the school, and that was a direct defiance of the federal ruling.
Yeah, and after that public standoff, the federal government had to step in. Eisenhower sent in federal troops to enforce the integration. But even after that, Faubus and the Arkansas government weren't done pushing back. So the Cooper v. Aaron case is the follow-up, where the state challenges the Supreme Court's authority.
Yeah, so basically the state of Arkansas was saying, we don't care if the Supreme Court says we're going to keep our schools segregated.
Exactly, and the most mind-blowing part is that they argued Brown was not law. They said that the court's ruling didn't have the authority over the states. That's why they were trying to argue in the case.
So Faubus and his supporters were basically telling the court to go jump in a lake. That's a pretty big challenge to the whole structure of the U.S. legal system.
And the Supreme Court wasn't having it. They came back with a unanimous decision, basically telling Arkansas, nope, the law is the law. They reiterated the ruling in Brown and reaffirmed that state governments had to comply with the Supreme Court's interpretation of the Constitution. The court wrote, the Constitution rights of children are not to be sacrificed or yielded to the prejudices of the people.
I mean, that's a pretty clear message. But what's also interesting is that the Supreme Court basically told the state government that not only could they not resist the ruling, but they had no right to interfere with it. The state could not overturn Brown by no any means. It's a big statement by the power of the judiciary.
Totally. It's the judicial branch standing firm on its authority. It reinforces the idea of judicial review. The court has the final say when it comes to interpreting the Constitution. And in this case, it was a really strong message that no state, no matter how powerful or defiant, could disregard the court's ruling.
And it's not just about legal principles here. It's about power. Arkansas thought they could get away with disobeying a Supreme Court decision, but in this case put a stop to that, showing the strength of federal law and the protection of individual rights, even in the face of a massive opposition.
The whole thing also sets up this precedent of federal enforcement when states resist. Like we saw in the federal government step in with troops in 1957, but after Cooper v. Aaron, there was this whole legal clarity thing that said states cannot just ignore federal law. It was like a formalization of the commitment to enforcing civil rights in the South.
It also helped legitimize the civil rights movement, because remember, this case wasn't just about Little Rock. It was about the broader resistance to Brown versus Board. This case was one of those major turning points that said the Supreme Court is not going to back down on this issue. So when we think about the civil rights movement in the late 50s and early 60s, the court's stance here helped set the tone for the push for further desegregation and equality.
Exactly, and let's not forget, this decision didn't make things magically better overnight. The struggle for desegregation and equality was far from over, but Cooper v. Aaron showed that the legal systems would back up the rights of individuals, even when political and social forces in the states were actively resisting change. It was a huge victory in the long fight for civil rights.
So, what do you think the legacy of this case is today? Because, I mean, if we're honest, we don't really see states challenging the Supreme Court's authority as openly anymore.
Yeah, but the case still has a huge impact. It set the stage for later rulings that reinforce the idea of an independent judiciary, one that's not beholden to political pressure. And it also helped establish the principle that public officials and state governments couldn't just ignore Supreme Court rulings, especially when they affected people's constitutional rights.
It's kind of amazing when you think about it. At the time, Faubus was a political powerhouse in Arkansas, and the state was openly challenging the Supreme Court. But now, Cooper v. Aaron is seen as a critical moment in the history of the judicial authority and civil rights. It really showed how, even in the face of extreme opposition, this Constitution would still protect the rights of individuals.
Exactly, and that's why, even today, we look back at Cooper v. Aaron as a symbol of how the judiciary system can safeguard civil liberties, even when the state tries to fight back. It's a reminder that justice, even if it's slow, has a way of prevailing.
Well, it definitely put Arkansas and the entire South on notice. The court wasn't playing around.
Nope, they weren't.
All right, Shane, I think we've pretty much dissected Cooper versus Aaron. This was a good discussion.
Definitely. It's a case that deserves a lot more attention, especially when people talk about the power of the Supreme Court in the fight for civil rights. So, Miles, reflecting on this podcast, what do you think is, the most valuable piece of information you can take away from, this court and the Cooper versus Aaron?
I think something I can take away from it is how the Supreme Court really helped out the state of Arkansas and how they really fought back against the governor and the state's government, and how they really chose to stand strong on the desegregation of.
And they didn't crack under pressure, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. How everyone was just they were all we have rights, and the Supreme Court was yeah, we can listen to that. But it was crazy how even the governor didn't even want to agree with the Supreme Court, and how he just openly just opposed them. It was kind of wild. Also, guys, thanks for listening to our podcast today. It was really fun dissecting Cooper versus Aaron.
This episode has been a production of the Capistrano Valley Christian Schools Podcast Network. Capistrano Valley Christian Schools is a Christian JK-12 school in San Juan Capistrano, California. Be sure to check out, subscribe to, and leave a review of this show and the other shows on our network on your podcast player of choice. Doing so supports the school community in a multitude of ways. For more information about the CVCS Podcast Network or any of our other shows, check out cvcs.org or email podcasts@cvcs.org. On behalf of the whole network, this is Mr. Jasper saying thank you again for listening, and stay tuned for more.